everyone, and welcome to Talent Canada's virtual roundtable discussing employees' perspectives on returning to work during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Marcel Vanderweer, editor of Talent Canada. Joining us for this roundtable session are Jose Dino, General Manager of TELUS Employer Solutions in Vancouver. Welcome, Jose.
Hi.
We have Kimberly Humphreys, Corporate Director of Employee Experience at the Interior Health Authority in Kelowna, BC. Thanks for joining us, Kimberly.
Thank you.
And we have David Weiss, CEO of Weiss International in Toronto. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
In partnership with TELUS Employer Solutions, Talent Canada recently conducted a survey of employees across Canada to take their temperature on returning to the workplace during the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's dive in. Returning to work in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic is a critical discussion for employers and their staff these days. Jose, if we can begin with you, do you believe the employee's perspective has been heard clearly enough when it comes to the return to work?
Well, that's a great question, Marcel. And I think the first question I would ask is, have organizations actually spent time speaking with their employees and communicating with them as well, and asking them how they feel in terms of, working in a current pandemic and also returning into a work environment? I think, it depends specifically what kind of industry you're in, and it certainly also involves the organization's initial response to the pandemic when it first started. What was the reaction? How has leadership been exhibited within the organization to prepare employees as well to work in this type of environment? Certainly there's different types of industries. There are people who, for example, are office workers, but there's also obviously a lot of employees who work in the field as well too. So I think that it's a very much of a mixed bag, Marcel, in terms of leadership displayed by the organization and certainly policies and processes that are going to help enable employees to return and to feel confident about that.
Sure, great point. Kimberly, what about you? Do you feel like employees have been heard clearly enough right now?
I would agree with a lot of things that Jose has said. I think if we look at it across a full spectrum, I would say in some places, absolutely. I think that employers have really been purposeful and with a good intent, talking with and listening to. But there are other industries and other things that have happened that I think that there's opportunity to continue the dialogue. The one piece that I would think, and I have not concern over, it's more around that people go out and have conversation once, and it's a point in time. And we know, especially with the pandemic, as more information happens and grows, so does people's perspectives as well as comfort levels. And I think that maybe the disconnect between sometimes employers think that they've communicated or gone out, and yes, they did at one point, but they haven't had an ongoing dialogue. And that's the piece that I would encourage people is, how do you not just get people's perspective, but have an ongoing dialogue?
So I think we also need to make a distinction between those organizations that had essential workers where people were on site, which means that the organization's already modified its on-site location during the pandemic to be able to adjust to people who have to come to work because they're working in a hospital, they're working in an environment where they must be on site. While the organizations that were able to send people home, and many of them did because they weren't essential workers, the office didn't change. Maybe they deployed technology remotely, but since the office didn't change, the changes are going to happen now that they're coming back, or maybe just before that. And that's a very significant difference. And you'll find even in your research that those people that have been working through the pandemic on site have a greater likelihood to be less uncomfortable because they saw what it's like, because they've been there, and maybe now they're coming back more often. While those that were remote, the office is first now making those changes. So it would make a lot of sense that they would be more anxious about returning.
All right. Great start, everyone. I want to follow up on this first question by turning to you, Kimberly. And What strategies might you suggest when it comes to understanding the comfort levels of a particular workforce in returning to work at this time?
Great question. And just following up on David's last point to the question, coming from Interior Health, we've actually had both. We've had essential workers that have been on site, but we also redeployed our staff home. And we're an organization that typically did not promote or support that flex work approach. And so at the start of the pandemic, 2,100 of our employees were sent home out of 21,000. So we have about 10% of our employees that are at home. And so some of the strategies we have used to kind of start the dialogue and keep the dialogue going is we've executed pulse check surveys and quick surveys, about 10 to 15 questions throughout, various points in time, and have tracked those results. We've also sent facilitated questions to leaders. As we all know, and research shows that the relationship of you with your direct leader is key and important in your engagement and understanding. And so we helped support the leaders have certain conversations, and then followed up with facilitated conversations with those leaders to then pull trends and help support make some decisions. We've also had open forum and blogs. So again, just various conversations at different points through different technologies. But the one piece that we're still curious about is we're a highly unionized employer, and really how to and where to bring some of those conversations and that stakeholder group in, because they are an important key piece of information and resource to employees.
Sure, great start on strategies. David, what about you at Weiss International? Anything that you did personally to reach out to your employees?
Well, Kimberly, first of all, I think you're doing pulse surveys is great. It actually is consistent with what you said earlier, that you don't assume that if you talk to them once that it doesn't change. So regular pulse surveys. I've also found that for larger organizations, there's an anxiety. Do we have to talk to everybody in every pulse survey? There's a lot of really clear sampling theory. If you have 1,000 people, you don't have to talk to 1,000 all the time. You can sample it, take 200 5 times, and you'll get 1,000 over 5 pulses. So, think about the possibility of having representation and not talking to everybody. But I want to deal with that union issue, Kimberly. I think it's an extremely important one. I found my first book was called Beyond the Walls of Conflict. It was a labor management book on trying to achieve mutual gains bargaining outcomes. And we found that when you try to get labor and management together, probably the common interest space is safety. So joint safety committees are a place where labor and management are able to have conversations outside of bargaining. And I would actually think this is really not an issue of comfort specifically, but the first standard is the workplace safe? Comfort is an emotional reaction, and it might be that it's not safe and my comfort level is bad because you're not doing your job. Or it might be that it is safe, but we're not communicating in a way that's making me feel comfortable. So it could, or maybe I just will never be comfortable. It's also possible. So I would think this is the perfect opportunity to engage in joint problem solving with labor and management together, because this is a common interest. Workplace safety and workforce safety would be a common interest. So I would probably experiment with that and encourage that to occur.
Sure. Jose, any further comments on understanding comfort levels?
Well, very similar to what Kimberly mentioned as well too. We certainly ran a number of employee surveys. We actually work with Aon Hewitt, one of the independent third-party organization that conduct the surveys, just to really get feedback from our employees or team members, how they're feeling, and just coming up with strategies on what we could do to actually provide some comfort to them that, we had a plan. We in terms of, a number of things that we've done to react and to respond to provide that comfort level. I'd say that because TELUS, we've actually had what we call our work styles program in place for well over 10 years. A lot of our employees are very used to working in a remote environment. So we were able to transition fairly quickly. It's been part of our real focus on having real estate work with human resources and our leadership teams to do so. So the transition was seamless in that respect. But we've also really identified a number of other challenges too. One of them is certainly mental health. We really focused on mental health and just the amount of stress that an employer or team member at TELUS is going through, working more in a confined space if it's unnatural to them. Other kind of stressors as well too around customers, for example, even just having more family members at home in a confined space. So we've certainly provided a lot of resources in that area as well. And just really focusing on the mental health aspect and also using apps that we've also developed as well too. So when we do the return to work, we have a lot of processes in place around, social tracking, things like that, reservation software as well too, to track exactly where employees are on TELUS property, et cetera.
I want to move on by starting to dig into the results of the Talent Canada survey on the return to work. And we had 850 respondents from across Canada from a wide range of industry. 50% were office workers. But of those continuing to work, 55% were comfortable, 37% were not. Of those working part-time at their work site, 50% were comfortable, 43% were not. And of those facing a return to work, 23% were comfortable, 73% were uncomfortable. So for me, the most glaring statistic of that set is the 73% of those currently facing the prospect of returning to work, while those who have remained in the workplace through the pandemic generally seem to be more comfortable. So David, what do you make of these responses from employees?
So we're looking at research data. And so we need to do a deeper dive into understanding what the data actually mean. Let me share with you the way I look at these kinds of surveys. So it's a 1 to 5 survey where 4 and 5 is, comfortable and very comfortable, and 1 and 2 is uncomfortable and very uncomfortable. So that's the way you do it. And typically what I do, as we do in engagement surveys and all kinds of surveys that are 1 to 5, is you add up the total percentage in that 4 and 5 category, the comfortable and very comfortable, and I kind of look at it like a grade point average. And so the grade point average would be if it's 80 or above, in other words, if comfortable and very comfortable is 80% or higher, you get an A in that course. If it's in the 70s, I'll give you a B. If it's in the 60s, I'll give you a C. If it's 59 or lower, I give you a D. Now, notwithstanding that you're right, the last one on people who are not working, they're coming back to work, 73% are uncomfortable, but 23% are in the comfortable, very comfortable. You get D is too good for that group, right? It really failed. But the other two groups, and it's distressing, are even more troublesome because they're the ones that have done the work already during the pandemic because they were in the office. One group was they were in the office, they're essential workers probably, and they're coming back, and now they're going back even more, or they were there part-time. So the office had to change, and those are 55% are comfortable, and the other one where it was part-time is 50%. So how can that possibly be? Just imagine this wasn't the pandemic. So we're now in January, and we're running a survey on how comfortable are you in the workplace. Would you respond if you found out that 55% of your employees are uncomfortable coming to the workplace? You would actually, be in shock. You'd hope it's 85, 95% are comfortable coming to the workplace. So all of this data is significantly problematic. It's not just the one. I can understand why it might be a little bit more extreme if you haven't been to the office at all, but all of it is very, very troublesome. So either it means that organizations have not done what they need to do to make it safer, or organizations haven't done what they need to do to communicate that it's safe and give people more comfort level. But all the data is rather troublesome.
Jose, do you want to build on David's comments?
Well, I mean, absolutely, I agree with David. There's no doubt, based on the survey data and just my awareness working with our own employees in some cases, but certainly working with other organizations as well too. It really varies, and I said this at the outset, in terms of how an organization has responded to this pandemic, how they've actually worked to take a look at existing business processes, in some cases, looked at the needs of employees by actually engaging and communicating with them as well too, and providing them with the necessary tools and leadership. And this is really important as well too, because the people that are responding in this manner are responding because in some cases they're looking for leadership. They're looking for leadership either from their manager, direct manager, or they're looking for leadership from the organization. At TELUS, I know we actually have a return to work playbook. We've actually completely mapped this out from many different perspectives as well too. But our focus is to provide our employees with the information that they need and to recognize that their safety is important to us, their mental health well-being is, and how they work and engage customers is important as well too. So it's really, once again, how you react, how you respond from an organizational perspective, I think, which can help calm and quell those, and providing employees with the necessary tools to be successful.
Sure, Kimberly, I want to get your thoughts as well. What's your takeaway from these early statistics?
I think David and Jose have described it and expressed it well. I think I would say is definitely we've noticed this trend across all of our buildings and all of our activities, even in healthcare. And, people just assume that healthcare workers are comfortable and know what to do in some of these situations. But I do think that the organization, as information changes, as people's perceptions change, need to react and respond continually. And we've noticed that throughout the pandemic. As more information comes, more confusion comes. Sometimes clarity doesn't come, and that then also increases the comfort level. And so I definitely think that this is some topic that is not for just the moment, but it is for the go forward in terms of how do we help support employees kind of coming back to the workplace, but feeling comfortable back in the workplace.
Just Marcel, I just might want to add one point. I was looking over the data carefully, and I found that of the 850 people, about 300 were management and higher. So you have a good proportion of people. It was an open-ended question. What's your position title? And that's what you have. So 300 is about 35% of the 850, which is pretty good. I was wondering if there would be a chance to look at the data for management and separate it from the frontline employees, whether you might find some patterns which would be a little bit disturbing, where what if we would find that management is more comfortable than employees? Because management have offices, because management have maybe better, bathrooms, what if we find that, and then the data is even worse for frontline employees? So here's my proposition. The standard should be that we should not allow the rules and policies and standards for employees to be lower than the policies and standards we set for management. So if management says this is what our rules are, they've got to apply it to employees. We're all in this one together. Everybody has to deal with safety in the workplace, and safety should not be determined by level within the organization.
That's a very interesting point, David. Thanks for bringing that up.
And I would just jump in with David, and a good point. I would also, though, be interested, and I know the data doesn't cut to this level, but the difference between frontline management, middle management, senior level. Because again, I also do think that there is again, this is my hypothesis of that middle management or that frontline manager. I would be interested to see what their level of comfort is compared to senior or to even frontline staff, because sometimes they get kind of sandwiched between not feeling like they have the control to answer certain questions or influence certain things in the environment, but they're being asked to by their employees.
It's an interesting subplot that I'll have to dig into as I write this piece, so thank you. Moving along, associated with these comfort levels that we've talked about is response to possible policy change employees would like to see their employers make. And from the statistics, 39% would like staggered work days, 31% want full-time work from home, 30% want a 4-day work week, and 29% want staggered start times. Jose, what do you take away from these responses? Do you think a return to the office is even a value, or might we be seeing the dawn of of a truly remote workforce?
Well, I think, just taking a look at these responses, it's telling us right away that workers in general are looking at some kind of, definitely kind of a change. And, whether or not we find a vaccine soon enough for the current pandemic, I just, how we work is going to change. It's just, my perspective is that either we've had employees who've had to shift working in a remote environment and actually like it. So a quick description for me, just, at TELUS, we've actually had what we call our Work South program probably for well over 10 years. It's not for everyone because obviously you have frontline employees that have to be on site. But when the pandemic hit, a lot of our employees were already used to this. So we've gone through about 10 years of remote work. And we've also faced some challenges along the way. Currently, it's been very successful, but along the way, there are challenges that employees will face in terms of if you're in a leadership role, how do you manage remotely, right? That's definitely going to be a challenge. It's also around making sure that you continue to have engagement and you have issues dealing with productivity addressed as well too in a remote work environment. I certainly see with the pandemic and the shift in terms of how people work, remote work seems to be becoming more and more prevalent. There's going to be a lot of issues that have to be dealt with, including issues around IT security as an example as well, and focus on leadership and employee engagement. How do you manage performance, etc. But having said that, I do see certainly a shift because people have been exposed to it. In some cases, it's moving more to a flexible work-life balance sort of model that some are embracing, some aren't yet. And really, to support that, you have to have a culture and organization that supports that. So, my initial comments.
Perfect. Kimberly, do you want to weigh in on that, on the eventual return to the office and whether it's actually needed?
I think, from all we're in a big social experiment right now, and there's a lot of information and anecdotal articles coming out. And I think the theme that we, continually hear, and even what I hear on a day-to-day from my team, is that people see a need to want to come back together. And so they're wanting to return to the office, but maybe not the way it was before. And so to me, I think that there is a return to office. I think that there is a need, but how and where and when we use those spaces will definitely evolve as we kind of evolve some of these other practices with flex work.
Sure. David, any comments from you?
In addition to what Jose and Kimberly said, if you think about staggered work days, full-time work from home, 4-day work week, staggered start times, working from home sometimes during the week, I think they're all saying one thing. And they're all saying that employees are asking their organizations to have fewer people when they enter the workplace, have fewer people when they're in the workplace, and have fewer people when we exit the workplace. So stagger them, less people coming in the office, and they're all saying different ways of achieving that outcome. And I believe what this is really reflecting is a situation where employees don't believe they can do this by themselves. They need organizational practices and policies to be in place to help them be safe. Like we could say, everybody show up on time, but then they just don't believe that they'll be able to keep socially distant. And this way, you're helping them. So I think this is one of those things where once it's created, it will be embraced by employees, not just simply from a work-life balance perspective, but actually from the perspective that the employer is helping the employees to be safe in the workplace by making sure we're not flooding too many people at the point of entry, during work, and at the point of exit.
Excellent points, guys. Thank you. When it comes to the eventual return to the office, comfort levels in terms of washroom usage, lunchrooms, elevators was largely split, with a slight majority indicating that they had little to no concerns with using these types of workspaces. Two areas where concerns were greater were public transit and fitness facilities. Kimberly, do these results surprise you? And How should employers be handling the split reactions, specifically when it comes to those with higher concerns?
Uh, Results don't surprise me. We're seeing it in our own workplaces, so I would have been surprised if it was something different. In terms of how to handle it as an employer, I would say that both groups I would say that the employer has the accountability to make all workplaces safe. And so it doesn't matter if people have a higher level of comfort or not. Employers must make sure that how they set up their environmental controls, administrative controls, give all people that assurance that it is safe. In terms of how to support somebody's comfort level, definitely there's opportunity to have different types of orientations and those kind of the application piece to hopefully help support somebody's comfort level if they have high anxiety. I think the one question that I would have here though is we're even noticing it in some of our organizations is when somebody has a higher comfort level, sometimes their compliance to some of those new safety protocols is not as high in terms of they're more tolerant of, you know, if the space says that it can only hold 2 or 3 people, oh well, I'm okay, I feel fine, I'm gonna, you know, pop in and 5 or 6 of us are going to be in the room. And so that compliance piece and how to help support not just the people that are comfortable in kind of pushing the boundaries of those spaces, but some of those individuals we're noticing with high anxiety are getting quite frustrated in terms of refusing to come to work, refusing to speak up in certain situations, going off on sick because of that. So I definitely think it's not just even how to help somebody be comfortable in the space, but how does the employer help support that space to continue to be safe if individuals are not compliant with some of that function.
Sure. Jose, what's your take on this?
Well, you know, maybe I'll just give you an insight on what we do because we've actually had remote workers in place. We actually have an online reservation system. So if you are going to enter a TELUS facility, there's a number of things you have to do. I mean, first of all, there's the completion of a questionnaire, which is very standard, but there's also a mandatory check-in 24 hours prior. The way we have it set up, you have to actually determine and through a reservation system exactly what floor you're going to and specifically what seats are available to you, and you can only specifically stay in those specific locations as well too. The problem is, and just listening to Kimberly's comment, I can still see potentially issues that could potentially arise, and that's where the organization has just got to be very, very strident in ensuring that there's very strict policies and processes in place around social distancing as well too. There is an IT solution in some respects, but in some cases as well too, it's just proper management leadership and policies in place to ensure that's actually adhered to.
Thanks, Jose. David, what's your take on the split reactions and potentially dealing with them?
First of all, this one is an intriguing question. So if you look at, you have one choice, which was won't use, which is a very clear statement. I'm just not going to do that. And you're right, fitness facilities, 48% of them said they won't use it. And public transit, 47% said they won't use it. But if you go down to the next ones, because you have a list of about 10 items here, carpooling, 35% won't carpool. Isn't that interesting? So in other words, now we're gonna have more cars in the parking area, and can you handle it? So no more carpooling, or that's a third of people. And shared workstations, 33% won't use shared workstations. So if we don't control it and they show up and they're required to go into a shared workstation, then a third of them aren't going to do it. So I think it's very important to use this data. Now, this is generic data because it's a broad audience, but use the same kinds of questions within your own organization and find out what's your people likely to do, because that will have implications. There's one more that I want to share with you, which is rather interesting. So of the won't use, stairways, 8% won't use it. So that means 92% will walk down steps. But on elevators, which is the only other way to get out of a building, if you have to go out some way and you're not on the first floor, 21% won't use it. So that means we're going to have an increase of 13% utilization of stairways just because people are avoiding elevators than they were before. So if it's true for your organization, maybe this is the time to make the stairways prettier. You can have 13% more of the people there. Paint it. How expensive is that? Put up some artwork on the wall, so at least if I'm walking in the stairways, I don't feel like I'm a second-class citizen. So use it as an opportunity to have a little fun with it, because 13%, 1 out of 6 people, 1 out of 7 people are going to be walking just because they won't use an elevator.
Excellent commentary, guys, and thank you for that specific one, David. When it comes to safety measures, it's not surprising that face masks, signage, hand sanitizer, and regular sanitation of workplaces were all deemed important by a majority of respondents. Filtration and HVAC systems also scored highly. David, I want to come right back to you here. So much has been learned about the virus in the past 6 months. Do these results prove that workers are indeed ready for this type of new normal?
I think the words new normal need to be reflected on. Like, what does that really mean? And I'm just going to give you 2 possible interpretations. It might mean that the new normal is that workers are going to have a different kind of environment at work. We're going to have different safety procedures. We're going to have staggered work. We're going to have different things occurring. And the employee and management need to operate within this new normal of more remote and accept it and know how to lead that way and engage people. But there is another interpretation of new normal, which is a bit disturbing. And that's the new normal of saying, we're not really going to change much in the work environment. We're going to meet minimum standards so we don't go and be outside of code on safety, but it's going to be minimum standards. And the new normal is employees get used to working in an environment that's less safe. And the new normal is work is dangerous. You used to go to the office and it was safe. Now you go to the office and it's dangerous. You want a job, do it. So if that's what is the new normal, then I think we have a very disturbing situation where I believe it'll be very challenging in the work environment. I certainly would love it to see the first version, where new normal means there's collaboration going on between the leaders of organizations and employees, so that it is very different and everybody has to modify their behavior. And I believe that people are, they're resilient. They showed it during the pandemic. I think employees and management were doing things in 2 weeks that we thought would take 3 years. It's been remarkable. And I believe coming back to work will be the same, but everybody has to do their part.
Thanks, David. Kimberly, any comments?
I do agree with David. I do believe people are resilient. I do think that there is good demonstration that people have adapted and are willing to adapt to these new ways of working. I just am concerned about people's ability to kind of have the capacity to continue to adapt in all walks of their life, in terms of, if they have children, the whole school system and the stress that comes with that. Even going to a grocery store, you're always in critical thinking. You're always sitting there and having to monitor your environment and what do I need to do different and how do I do it and when do I do it, and those kind of pieces. And so it speaks to something that Jose talked about earlier around mental health. And so I think that people have inherent ability and intent to do this. I'm just concerned that as a society and as a group of people, now we're expecting everyone to come back to work and work in a new way. And that takes a lot of energy and effort. And do they have the capacity? They have the will. They might not just have the capacity sometimes to do it.
Sure. Jose, do you want to reflect on that or share another comment?
Yeah. Well, just to add to what Kimberly just said as well too, I think that's where an organization, outside of here's some hand sanitizer and a mask, may the force be with you. You got to look a lot deeper than that, and certainly it's one of the things I brought up earlier was mental health and well-being as well too, because there's an incredible amount of stress in your personal life. There's incredible stress just doing your day-to-day activities, and now your work environment's completely changed. And is this the new normal? It's changing. Our businesses are transforming. I'm hoping for that day where we're going to find that magic vaccine that's going to solve some of this. But even then, I do believe that the work environment overall is going to change, because we've actually been exposed to new ways of working. In some cases, they've become more popular. In some cases, they haven't. There are people who are working more remotely that feel isolated, because they're not actually working with their work colleagues. I'm thinking about Kimberly's comments regarding people wanting to come back to the office because their work colleagues are there. But how do you do that, and how do you do it effectively? So the new normal is going to be interesting. An organization has to provide that type of leadership and some guidance as well too, and just taking into account the needs of employees as they return to work.
Yeah, great comments, guys. Well-rounded responses. I have two more questions for you guys, and for this one, I want to focus on the remote workforce. Obviously, it's been over 6 months since the pandemic's begun. For those who continue to work from home, our survey shows that flexible work hours, company-paid internet and smartphones, as well as virtual healthcare and video conferencing technology, they all appear to be in demand. Jose, what do you make of these types of requests from employees, and are employers keeping up with these types of demands?
So as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing it at TELUS for well over 10 years with our work style flexible work program. And I've certainly seen a lot of the positives. And productivity, if it's managed correctly, productivity we found actually improves. It's also a great retention opportunity for people who adopt a program like this and actually implement it into more of a work-life balance program. But there's also other issues too that I think organizations have to be aware of. One is isolation. I think that's certainly something that has to be addressed. Not all leaders are comfortable leading in this type of an environment. There's certainly a lot of work that an organization, and specifically human resources, has to do to actually help enable leaders, managers to lead in this type of environment as well. I do know a lot of employees who do like this program because they'd like to be able to have that flexibility and take advantage, for example, of being able to drop their kids off at school or pick them up and not having to be in the office at a specific time and making it the time elsewhere. But there's a lot of things to consider, everything from internet security, information that has to be put in a very secure environment. So that's where your CIO organization has to also play a significant role as well too. My experience is it's been a very positive one. I think organizations are adapting based on how comfortable they were. I know organizations that had adopted a program like this a couple of years ago, and so it wasn't a huge transition. I know people who actually literally pulled their desktops off their desks and threw it in their cars and plugged it in at home because they didn't have any other solution. So there's certainly different areas and stages where organizations are in doing this. So just some initial comments from me.
Great. Kimberly, what's your take on this? Are employers actually adapting, or are they simply trying to wait this out? What's your take?
I would agree and build on what Jose said. In our organization and ones that I know of from my colleague conversations, organizations are really positively trying to respond. I think it's about the speed in which things are changing and the requests that are coming that organizations are trying to keep up with. I know in our organization, we're not just looking for the short-term solution in terms of what can we do for the next 3 to 6 months, but really are looking at this as we may never go back to what it was before. So how do we move forward? And I think that looking at the tools, supports, and even the benefits and how we structure, it is going to impact what people value. Because when I drove into my office building before, the parking spot closest to the building in the corner office was of the most value. And now when I'm working at home, and what are some of the tools and the things that will benefit me more at home? So I do think as time evolves and we get more information, and this just doesn't become about responding to a pandemic, but focusing on how do we move the workplace forward. All of these pieces will have to be continually reevaluated. But for now, in terms of the response to the pandemic, I would say that what I've seen is the employers have responded in due course and with good intent.
Thank you. David, I'll let you wrap up on that one.
Well, great comments. What I'm finding is that many organizations that I'm collaborating with are using, without even knowing the words, agile principles to implement new kinds of ways of working. So programs that would have taken 1 year to implement because it would have gone through lots of testing, and they call that the waterfall technique, and that ultimately they would have got it right probably in the end. But now they're saying, let's just try it, and if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. So for example, in one company, we had about 600 people in this organization. It was around March 11th. So Friday was the 13th. That's when most sports were canceled. The 16th is lockdown day. So March 11th or so, they were pretty sure something was going to happen. Everybody knew this was really not a good situation. And they were scared. They said, we don't know whether or not our intranet can handle it if everybody is going to be on it at the same time. We just don't have any clue. And then the person said, well, Jose, this kind of story.
Oh yeah.
So, and you're dealing with 30,000 people, so it's a little bit different. They didn't even know if 600 could do it. And so what they so the IT person said, well, it's really simple. We'll do a study. We'll get back to you in about a month. And then they said, no. We need to know today. We're going to put out a message, and everybody in the organization at 3 o'clock this afternoon, we're all going on the internet, and we're going to see if it blows up. And they did, and it did well. They said, guess what? It works good. We can go home if we have to. But it was, we're getting more, they call it minimal viable products, more agile, fail fast, all this kind of language. It's coming into the lexicon, and I believe not even knowing agile or knowing design thinking. It's just survival. And good answers are happening much more rapidly. So that's maybe a positive silver lining on all these problems that we're seeing.
Excellent conclusion there, David. Finally, I want to touch on the return to work and what that might look like in terms of future prospects. So I think in the past 6 months, we've proven that work can be conducted from anywhere, and our survey results seem to line up with that. So Kimberly, what type of impact do you think the COVID-19 pandemic will have on Canadian workplaces?
I love this question. I love that it was the end question, because this is a question that we could pretty much talk for, I think, a day, if not a week on. But when I think about the impacts, I kind of chunk it into some categories. And I think that how and what we use our building footprint for is going to be impacted. And so I love David's example of, staircases, right? So I do think that there's going to be some type of creativity and some type of evolution in how we create collaboration spaces, and gone are the days of little cubicles and figuring out how many people we can push into the smallest space possible. On the other side, I think it's the way we think about work, the construct of work, how we believe in what we think about work and our beliefs around it. So for example, what is a work day? When does it begin? How does it start? And then also one piece is like what's acceptable for today was not acceptable for, a couple of months ago. So for example, if, you're at home and a colleague's child walks through the screen, or a dog barks in the background in January, you were always jumping around trying to control every variable. But today there's a little bit more of a humanistic piece to some of this. And so I do think the construct of work and how that evolves will change. the way we work. And so how we onboard somebody, our training, all of those kind of pieces are evolving today, and they will continue to evolve into the future. And then procedures, practices, and policies. So, even Jose was talking about the screening practices and wearing masks in workplaces and those kind of things. All of those will evolve based on kind of our experiences of today. And definitely we have this agile, let's just go and try it, as David talked about it. But I do think the organizations will then have to quickly catch up with some of this governance piece around those practices and policies. And so those will evolve. And then lastly, because all of these pieces are moving, the culture of organizations. So if you think about what makes up a culture of an organization, those rituals, those artifacts, those stories. So if, again, people are working in different ways, not so much together in one particular place, how are workplaces and employers going to evolve their practices around embedding culture and an organizational culture across many? So that's kind of how I start to think about it, but definitely look forward to hearing what David and Jose think, because it is a really rich and meaty topic.
Sure. Jose, what's your take on the pandemic effect on the future of Canadian workplaces?
Well, without a doubt, I think, depending on the organization, their ability to adapt and the industry they're in, I think obviously organizations are at different stages. Kimberly certainly brought up a whole number of great points as well too. And one of them that really hit me was culture, because I know a lot of workers that are now embracing working in more of a remote environment. They see the advantages in some cases. I brought up the issue around mental health, though. I brought up the issue around self-isolation as well too, where some of those issues have to be addressed. And I think as well too, that's where how do you, as an organization, do you really ensure that you have that culture, that sense of belonging in an organization, that you're helping contribute to the needs of the organization as well, and doing it in a remote manner. The other conversation, there's two other conversations I see with the future of work. One is being in a workspace, whether it was at a retail location or an office, you're physically present. That doesn't necessarily mean you're productive though. So now I also see a focus more that will grow and evolve around productivity. And so how do you then manage and ensure you have that productivity? That will then drive further need for leaders to really lead and manage in this type of environment. And it's not easy. There has to be trust, and an organization has to have the kind of culture to help support that as well too. So just some additional comments as well to the discussion.
David, I'll give you the last word.
I think that we have gone through a massive experience, an experiment that has destroyed a myth that existed in organizations. And the myth is that if you let people work remotely, they won't be productive. And we found it's just not true. Different people are more productive, different people are less, but there's still, overall, there isn't the difference that's occurring here. People can work remotely. They don't have to be watched all the time. And it's starting to evolve to some new expectations that both Kimberly and Jose refer to in different ways. But we're actually, even in the diversity literature now, are talking about diversity to inclusion. So that's been around for a while, which means that we have to have representation of diverse populations, but do we include them even if we have them present? And so that becomes inclusiveness. But with COVID, we have a new evolution of that. It's not just inclusive, it's now belonging. And Jose used the word belonging, where, Kimberly, you're right. We're in each other's homes. And all of a sudden the dog comes running by, and we have to, we're getting to know people on a level that we weren't knowing them before. In one organization, they announced that from now on, any person, animal in your home, we're going to call them a coworker. So the little baby starts crying, and they said, my coworker needs a diaper change. I'll be back in 5 minutes. So we're getting all this different kind of reality where the integration of life with work is getting closer and closer because we're entering into people's homes. I think that we really have done that, and I don't think it's going to disappear. I think that will be sustained, and leadership needs to know how to nurture it and make it as an asset to really bring people in and have them engaged and committed, and in Jose's terms, productive, so that we can get really good outcomes even in this new way of working.
Thanks so much, everyone. I'd like to conclude by thanking you each for your contributions to this very important conversation. Talent Canada will continue to monitor the return to work discussion in the coming weeks and months at talentcanada.ca. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.